Okay, hey, welcome to another Bible study with Douglas. Great to be with you guys. As always, it's really my pleasure to do these studies with you. We finished Genesis, if you can believe that, and now we're moving on to the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot in Hebrew, the book Shemot. Now, Exodus, very, very important book, to say the least. They're all important, of course, we know that. But remember that the first 5 books are what we call the Pentateuch, or they're called the Torah. All right, Pentateuch is Greek, it means 5. In Hebrew, it's called the Torah. The first 5 books, these are the books of Moses. All right, and when we talk about, when Paul talked about all Scripture being God-breathed, he wasn't talking about the New Testament per se, that was still in process of being written. He was talking about the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, and they are still just as relevant today as they ever were. And I believe that having this very unfortunate attitude that the Torah was for the Jews, it's for the Jews, it's for back then, and, you know, Jesus has done away with all that. And you may laugh at that and say, well, I never thought that. Well, there are a lot of people that do think that. And I keep bumping into them somehow online in different places. People think that. And on the one hand, they deny it. On this side of their mouth, they deny it. But on the other side, they completely acknowledge it, and they preach that. They believe that. So I really want to impress upon you as we continue to go through the Bible that the whole thing is the Word of God. There's no part of it that God's like, oh, I don't like that. It was such a bad idea. Now, having said that, let me just say this. The one thing that God truly did do away with was the one thing that was temporary to begin with, and that is the Aaronic or Levitical priesthood. If you go through the book of Hebrews, the Aaronic or Levitical priesthood was not the ideal, but it was added because of offense. It was added because the people did not want to be a kingdom of priests. God wanted them to be a kingdom of priests. They're like, yeah, we'll do everybody he says. And while God is giving the Torah to Moses, the people are down there frolicking with this golden calf. And so basically God's like, oh, okay, why don't I just kill him and start over? Moses is like, no, that would be so cool. Let's not do that. So Moses had to intercede for the people. And then the very reason that the high priest has to take a bull for himself is because he or his father, Aaron, blew it. Okay, blew it big time. Okay, so the whole Levitical thing, Levitical priesthood, all of these extra things were added because of offense. That's what happened, is because of the offense. God wanted to be in their midst. So yes, God did do away with that because that was never his original plan. It was always a stopgap measure. Okay, it's like saying, well, look, you know, we're tearing down Shantytown right now because now we have the real building. You're like, well, but Shantytown was so cool. Like, no, Shantytown was always a temporary measure. It was never supposed to be the real deal. And so that's basically with the Levitical priesthood. But all of the instructions that have to do with living, righteous living, God is still into. He's still into those. And those include the dietary things. They include that taking that 7th day off. Oh my goodness, having to take a day off. It's funny how people get really bent out of shape. They're like, Doug is teaching legalism. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm teaching that you should take a day off. Okay? Because that's what God said, take a day off. Is it so hard, people, to take a day off? God said, take the 7th day off. Who am I to argue with God? Okay? And you know what? It's not that hard to take a day off. Doesn't mean that you have to sit, you know, on your couch and you just have to, you know, be bored all day. You can actually do fun things on your day off, okay? So it just means don't work. That's all it means. Don't do your regular work. Now, if you're a nurse or you're a doctor, you're an ambulance driver, well, okay. There's always exceptions. Saving a life, helping people is always above taking the day off. Remember that the Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. Okay, so I'm prefacing this book with this because we're going to get into the law. We're going to get into this new covenant that God is going to create with the children of Israel. And what we're going to see is that it is, in fact, a marriage contract. It's a marriage covenant. God is now taking Israel as a nation. He's going to basically come in, be the knight in shining armor. He's going to save the day, and he's going to marry the princess. All right, and it's supposed to be, and they lived happily ever after. But that's not the story that we have. It wasn't happily ever after. It was she started cheating on him from day one. That's the story that we have before us. And so we're going to see now that the children of Israel have been in Egypt for about 400 years at this point. And they've become slaves, and it's going to take a long time for that attitude of slavery to get out of their heads. And you may say, well, that's really interesting. That's fascinating. It's good for the Jews, but what does it have to do with for me? Because I'm free. I'm free in Jesus. Well, as much as we say that almost like a mantra, that it's all under the blood, at least in my own life, and I've noticed it in many other people's lives as well, that we are all still very much enslaved in our minds. We're enslaved with how we see the world. And I believe that one of the major things that God wanted to do and wants to do, and what Jesus came teaching, was how to appropriate the prerogatives, the rights, the privileges, and the power of the kingdom of heaven, not only for the hereafter, but for the here and now. Okay, not only after the grave or beyond the grave and the life yet to come, but in the life right now. You see, when we're dead, great, whatever happens, que sera, sera, right? What can I do about it when I'm dead? Okay, but there's a lot that I can do right now. Okay, so yes, I want the pie in the sky, I really do, but I want to be living for today as well. And I think this is where sometimes as Christians we check out. We say, well, I know I'm saved. And for us, saved means when I die, I go to heaven. Okay, if that is your definition of being saved, that's a very poor definition. It has some truth in it, yes, but it's a very poor understanding of what it is to be saved. There's so much more that God would have for us. And his basic plan has not ever changed. He created man because he wants to have fellowship with man. That's the big story. Okay, that's the big story that God wants us to get. And God's like, look, I've given you dominion over the earth. You get to do cool things. We blew it in the garden. But then God has another plan, and he starts working with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we see that in the lives of those men and their family, they have power to understand dreams and all these cool things that God is doing on their behalf. And then we see with Moses that he does all of these phenomenal miracles. And after a while, God gets a little bit frustrated because he's been doing all these miracles for the children of Israel, and they will not believe. They will not believe. And God says, you know what? Fine. That does it. You guys, this generation, are going to die in the wilderness because 10 times I showed you my power and you would not believe. Fast forward to the time of Jesus. The disciples are getting in the boat, and Jesus says, hey, watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees. And they're like, is it because we didn't bring any bread? He's like, don't you guys get it? When I fed the 5,000, how many baskets did you have left over? Well, we had 12. And the 4,000, how many we have left over? 7. So it's not, he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. They're like, oh, he's talking about the doctrine of the Pharisees. Why? What did those Pharisees do? The Pharisees came and said, hey, show us a sign. And Jesus is like scratching his head like, what? I just fed 5,000 people or 4,000 people and did all these miracles, and you say, show me a sign? What are you talking about? You see, no matter what Jesus did, they would not believe. And it's the same thing with the children of Israel. back in the wilderness. And that's why it says in Hebrews, it says that they received the same gospel as we do, but they would not believe because they could not enter in because of their unbelief. Because of their unbelief. So this book is incredibly relevant for us. Incredibly relevant as far as the application from your own life. Wow, there's a ton. All right. This is also where we begin the celebration of the feast. You guys, if you're not celebrating the feast, repent. Okay. I'll tell you why. One reason, okay, it's always the question of what's in it for me, right? That's how we operate because we're selfish beings. Okay. So what's in it for you? It's easy. Food. Okay. Food. You get to eat, right? What could be better? There's food. Yes, I'll be there, right? You know, really, we'll work for food, right? So God's like, look, I've established 7 feasts during the year. They're a lot of fun. Only one of those do you have to like actually fast. And talking about fasting, that should be the one day that you actually fast during the year. If you don't ever fast throughout the year, fine. But on Yom Kippur, you should be fasting. Okay, you'll make it. You'll be okay. Trust me. You won't die. Like, oh, I don't have to for my salvation, do I? No, you don't have to do anything for your salvation. That was a free gift. Get it? Right? But now that you're in, why don't you try it? See that you might grow. It's called sanctification. Okay? So this is such a wonderful book. And it really gets exciting from here on out because now we really start to have a lot of a lot more parallels. We see the parallel between Moses and Jesus. We get to look at some history. We get to see the 10 Commandments. We get to see this magnificent power of God in a way that we didn't really see up until this point. We saw glimpses of it. We saw angels showing up here and there. Genesis was a phenomenal book. Don't get me wrong. I love it. Okay, but Exodus now is not going to take us and show us the beginning of the nation of Israel. And we're going to see the marriage between God and Israel, a marriage that goes sour very, very quickly. And it's because of the sour marriage that God had to send Jesus so that the initial marriage contract could be annulled. It could be done away with. And then a new marriage contract could be established between the house of Israel and the house of Jacob and, of course, God. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're going to be looking at right here. So in Hebrew, this is Ele Shmot, okay? Ve'ele Shmot, and these are the names. That's how the book starts. And so the name of this book in Hebrew is Shmot, or names. The term Exodus really comes from the Greek, but it's not reflected there in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, it's just whatever the first couple words were, they would choose one of those, and that would be the name. Okay, so the next book, Leviticus, is Vayikra, and he called. All right, and then you go to Bamidbar, in the desert, all right, for the book of Numbers. So that's really all you have when it comes to naming a book. It's very simple, but it doesn't really matter, okay? So Exodus 1, verse 1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man in his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. Now it's interesting, it says that those who came out of the thigh of Jacob. Okay, so when we kind of think back now to where the prophet, or the servant of Abraham put his hand under his thigh, okay, it probably wasn't just his thigh, but it was probably his loins, okay? In other words, he put it right there on the family jewels, and that became a very sacred oath, right? It's not something you do every day, and that became it's a memorable experience, and you know that you're it's like you're swearing on your mother's grave or something like that, okay? But and you're kind of swearing on future generations is what you're doing, okay? So anyway, these are those who literally came out of the thigh or the loins of Jacob, 70 persons. And Joseph died all his brothers, and all that generation. So remember, Joseph lived to be 110 years old. He was a national hero. And they loved Joseph. Pharaoh loved Joseph. He made Pharaoh phenomenally wealthy, like a trillionaire in today's money. Okay, I mean, literally, if you could think about it, if you could basically own everything in your country, you're basically a trillionaire. I wouldn't say a billionaire, but really a trillionaire, because you now own everything. You own everything in the entire country is yours, and that's what Jacob did or that's what Joseph did for Pharaoh. So he was a national hero. And it says, but the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied, and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. So they started off in Goshen, 70 people. Now approximately 400 years have passed, and we're probably like 320 or something like that, because we still have a few to go. But they have really just become an incredible people. They're now a nation. They're not just a small clan, but they're now considered a nation. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Okay, now the bummer here is that we don't know the name of this king, and there's endless speculation. I'll give you my 2 cents worth, okay? But the bottom line is we don't know with certainty who this king is. There are certain clues that we can study to get an idea of who it could be and who it couldn't be, but we don't know ultimately who this is. So I'll give you my best educated guess from the research that I've studied, and from a friend of mine who's done some excellent research that I think you'll find very interesting. So this king, he arises, he doesn't know Joseph. Okay, this kind of makes sense. I mean, let's think about it. Let's think, 300 or 400 years ago in our own history, and some guy who's a national hero, and you come along, you say, oh, who cares? I don't care that Paul Revere, saved the day back when the British are coming. Who cares? I don't care about Paul Revere, right? You could do something like that, where the Revere family is no longer an important name, or the Washington family, like, who cares about those Washingtonians? Whatever, we don't need them. So basically, either this king is simply ignorant, which is possible. They didn't have the local library, but to be honest, the Egyptians were pretty good at keeping records. Joseph is a superhero of his day. It's unlikely that Pharaoh would just simply be in the dark on this one. It's very unlikely. Probably what is happening here is, by not knowing him, he did not care for him. Okay, he did not care for him. The word here, yada, of course, it means to know something intellectually, or it can be to know something experientially. All right, so like Adam knew his wife, right? There's definitely an experience there. So, I can't really say what it means. The word itself doesn't give us enough clues, but whatever it is, maybe it's through ignorance, but probably it's simply through apathy. He just doesn't care about Joseph. He doesn't care about this one. And no longer are we going to let those Israelites sort of run the show. He probably I know who Joseph is, but I'm not going to acknowledge him any longer. That's probably the word that we're looking for, is to acknowledge. You can have knowledge of something, but to acknowledge is to basically give place of importance to something. I acknowledge what you did for the company. Thank you. Right? I know you did, but I'm going to actually acknowledge what you did and pay my respects to that. So probably that's the flavor of what we have, is this king is not acknowledging Joseph and all the incredible contributions. There would be no Egypt if it were not for Joseph. I mean, that is literally the truth. There would be no Egypt if it were not for Joseph, and of course, Joseph's king. And he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. So he's really starting to get insecure. He realizes, look, there's really two people in the same land. There's two people in the same land, and it's what's happening here. It's called fear. Fear. When you really boil it down, there are two primary emotions. There are two primary realities. One is love. The other is fear. And from fear come a whole range of emotions. From fear comes anger, and from anger comes hatred. Well, why are you angry? What does fear have to do with anger? Well, kind of think back for a time when you've been angry. Think about why you were angry. Probably because you were afraid, but you felt powerless to do anything about it. All right? So when you begin to feel you're afraid that something bad's going to happen, and yet you have no power to change that thing, you become angry. And once you become angry because you feel powerless, or that if that continues, it turns to hatred. So it's really an awful feeling. And that is the number one weapon that Satan has against us, is fear. And more often than not, almost all the time, it's unfounded. There's really nothing there. It's smoke and mirrors. But it looks so believable. It's so powerful. And we're like, oh my goodness, because Satan can use our senses. He can put things in front of our face. They're like, oh my goodness, we're all going to fail. Okay, and when you keep going through this book, the children of Israel were constantly in a state of fear. So if this is you, you're in good company. And if you want to read the New Testament, if you're a New Testament only kind of Christian, great. Go check out those disciples. Jesus was constantly exhorting them to not be afraid. Don't be afraid. We see it throughout the Bible so many times. Don't be afraid. Fear not. Be strong and courageous. I am with you. We're going to see it when we get to chapter 3. Moses, finds this burning bush, and God's there. He's like, hey, Moses, come here. I got something for you to do. Moses is like, me? I can't do it. I can't talk. Not that smart. God's like, I'll be with you, And again, it's fear. Fear all the time. We saw it with Abraham. We saw it with Isaac. We saw it with Jacob. We saw it with his sons. Fear all the way through. So Satan has been using fear since day one. Really, Adam and Eve, I don't know, I can't prove that it was fear that Adam was reacting on, but quite possibly, because what he did is Satan created this question, hey, what's that fruit there? Well, we're not supposed to eat that. Well, God knows that your eyes will be open when you eat it. It might have triggered like, well, wait a second. Is God holding out on me? I'm afraid that if I don't do that, my eyes won't be open. So that's a possibility, okay? I'm just laying it out there as a possibility. So this king is experiencing great fear. He's afraid that the children of Israel will become more numerous and that they will take over, that they will take over his kingdom. And so he comes up with this plan. He says, come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. So he's afraid that the Israelites are going to hang out with the enemies, and then you'll have a war on two fronts. You'll have the enemy from within and the enemy from without. Okay, and we don't know if there were any kind of discussions or if there were some things that happened that made him think that. We just don't know. But nevertheless, maybe Satan kind of engineered something. Maybe he didn't. We just can't say. But nevertheless, it's fear that has taken over. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. Now, basically their plan is, let's enslave them, work them hard, so that they cannot be fruitful and they won't multiply as much. Okay, they will basically, they have fewer kids. We'll kind of work them to death, and that way they cannot rise up against us. And they're building these supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. Now, Ramses is not the city of Ramses. Ramses is a different spelling. This, of course, is one of the reasons that the liberal scholars believe that the Pharaoh of the Exodus was Ramses II. Okay, Ramses II was the greatest Pharaoh of the New Kingdom. Now you have to understand a little bit of Egyptian history here. Egyptian history is broken up into 3 different kingdoms with what we call these sort of blackout periods in between. That's what the traditional Egyptology teaches, okay? But we're going to discover that maybe that model isn't quite right. And that's based on the work of Manetho, who basically had this king list of about, I believe it was 31 kings, 31 pharaohs that reigned, or 31 dynasties, excuse me, 31 dynasties. Got that wrong. Okay, more kings than that, but 31 dynasties, because you know it's a long period, it's a couple thousand years. But 31 dynasties, and according to Manetho, they were all laid out chronologically. But there's actually some really interesting research, and I have to give credit to my friend Brad Sparks, who's been writing a book for a long time now. So Brad, if you're listening, please finish that book. I'm desperately waiting for your book. All right, but I believe his research, and he's discovered that the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom, which according to the traditional chronology is one after the other, but he's actually suggesting that they're parallel. They're happening at the same time, and the Old Kingdom was happening in southern Egypt, and the Middle Kingdom was happening in northern Egypt. And I always get those turned around because when you go to Egypt, the high point of Egypt is in the south next to Ethiopia, and the low point is in the north, which is in Alexandria. So they talk about Upper Egypt versus Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt is southern Egypt, and Lower Egypt is northern Egypt. Now, there's no reason that we should think that north means higher, but somehow in our minds we sort of associate them like that, okay? Who knows why? Probably because in America, many of, I think almost all, as far as I know, of the rivers go from north to south. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's why we sort of have that feeling. But I mean, there's no geographic reason why it should be that way. Just wherever the mountain is, it goes down from there, right? So that's basically what's happening. So the suggestion then is that you had a divided kingdom, and there was an Egyptian king in the south, and there was an Egyptian king in the north, okay? Same basic area of Egypt, but 2 different kingdoms. And then later we do know that the Egyptian kings wore a unified crown. In other words, they took the crown of the south and the crown of the north, and they combined them to make one crown that was the unified crown. And that was symbolizing that this particular pharaoh was reigning over both the north and the south. And it gives us some insight as to why it may be called Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim for Egypt is actually in the dual, so that means it means Egypt's, or the dual Egypt. And that's probably a reference, at least in my opinion, it's a reference to the southern Egypt and the northern Egypt, or the upper Egypt and lower Egypt. Okay, so a lot of interesting things. I will repeat that as we go through the book, because I know that may take a couple times to kind of let all that click. But I think that my friend Brett Sparks is correct that the Old Kingdom was the northern, or the upper Egypt, and south. Okay, I'll get it right eventually. And so that we'll see how that works out in just a second here. So the Pithom and Ramses were not because of the Pharaoh Ramses. He was much, much later. Ramses was around 1200 BC. And according to 1 Kings chapter 6, it talks about that there were 480 years since the Exodus, right? So that happened, according to many people, happened in 966 is when Solomon dedicated the temple. So you just go back 480 years, takes you to 446 BC. That is the generally accepted date among conservative scholars. Now again, is it off plus or minus 10 years, 20 years? Yeah, maybe, okay? But that's the generally accepted number. I mean, I'm okay with 10 or 20 years either way, but 200 years, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. That's hard for me to rationalize. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. Now, isn't that great? All right. Now, think about it. The more the world tries to beat on you, when you press into God, he's going to continue to bless you. Okay. The world wants to beat us down. Our job is to not give up. And it's not always easy, right? You're like, oh, just throw your hands up, throw the towel in, forget it. I'm not going to keep at this. But so often when we find ourselves at that point of breaking, if we'll just get past it, then the parabolic curve is right after that, okay? Like, we're kind of drudging along for a while, like, oh, this is so hard, right? And it's just, we're just about to crest and to have this incredible time of success, and we so often throw in the towel right there. Boy, is it tempting to do that. I mean, guilty, okay? We got to be careful. We got to be strong and determine what it is that we're going to do. If we'll trust in the Lord and we will not give up and believe, have faith, we'll see amazing things. But if we don't, if we doubt, God says, look, if you doubt, don't expect to get anything from me. I really hate that verse in James chapter 1. I'm like, Lord, seriously? Like, really? You had to say it like that. Like, does that really seem fair? And yet, I was just thinking about it today. I'm like, it just doesn't seem fair that he would say it that way. And yet I thought about it. The flip side is also true. Go with me to James chapter 1. James chapter 1. Verse 5. James 1:5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. I tell you, I hate this verse. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. I'm like, Lord, I'm that man. I'm like tossed back and forth. It's not fair because I have doubts and I'm scared. And it just didn't seem fair. I'm like, that's a really harsh road, Lord. But I thought, but the flip side is pretty cool. Okay, because Jesus said that if we believe and we believe that we receive it, or believe that we have it, you will receive it. Okay, so if we do have that faith without doubting, then the payout is phenomenal. Okay, it's kind of a double or nothing, right? If you don't believe, you get nothing. But if you do believe, you get it all. You get everything. You get the grand prize and all the bonus things thrown in when you believe and you don't doubt. So God is working with us. He's been working with mankind for a long time, trying to get us to believe, because the kingdom of heaven is awesome and it can be experienced beginning now. I'm not saying we're going to have it on all of its fullness, because we won't. Okay, but we'll get to enjoy a really good taste of heaven if we'll press in and believe right now. Okay, so, and the good news is that, look, you get to enjoy all this amazing stuff here, and you get even more beyond the grave. So that's a really good deal. But so often we're living like paupers. We're living like, spiritual paupers. I don't just mean money. I'm not opposed to the money, but I'm just saying it's not about the money per se. It's about having that wealthy mindset, that wealthy spiritual condition. That's what we're after. It's not just about dollars and cents. It's about actually knowing who you are in God, and that God is faithful and that there's no lack in his kingdom. When you know that, when your mind is fixed on him, you don't care about your bank account. You're like, what do I care? God's going to take care of it. You know, what did Jesus say? He said, why do you worry? Which of you can add 1 cubit to his span of life by worrying, or can add more hair, right? You know, you can't do anything like that. So don't worry, right? Today has enough trouble. Don't worry about tomorrow. Your Father will take care of you. He takes care of the birds, takes care of the lilies. He'll take care of you. That's what he keeps telling us to be like. And do we get the message? No. Do we believe him? No. You know, really, we're violating the 3rd commandment all the time. And probably one of the worst switcheroos that the enemy has ever done is that, oh, the 3rd commandment, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Well, that just means to don't use it as a swear word. Well, we certainly should not do that. Okay, but you know, GD is not taking God's name in vain. Okay, because that's not God's name, first of all. But secondly, if we're like not taking his name in vain, or we're honoring his name, what are we doing? We're believing what he said. We're believing what he said. Okay. Now look, if I told you, look, you know, tomorrow I'm going to be there at 5 o'clock, right? And the next day you're like, oh, Doug won't be here at 5 o'clock. What are you doing? You're not believing me. Now maybe I deserve that because I'm a fallible human. But in God's case, you should believe him, right? Well, let's take somebody more important than me. Okay, let's take a head of state. You know, he'll probably be on time, right? It's one of these political things. He'll probably be on time. It has to do with the national security. They'll be on time, right? And so when they say, look, we're going to be there at 3 o'clock, you should expect them at 3 o'clock. You say, oh, they won't be here until 4 o'clock. You're dishonoring their name. Now, maybe that's a silly example. But the point is that when God says, I will do this, and we're like, yeah, I know you said, I believe you said it, God. I believe you have good intentions. But by my actions, I don't really believe that you're going to do it. Okay? I say one thing with my lips. Oh, yes, God's going to do it. But by my actions, I betray that. You see, we say, yes, I believe in the Lord. I believe he's going to provide. But then what do? We start to worry. Are we honoring his name? No, we're not. We are dishonoring his name. We're taking his name in vain. If we, as Christians, as believers, say that we trust in the Lord Jesus Christ, then we need to believe the Lord Jesus Christ, not merely that he died on the cross. Okay, and I don't say that in a disrespectful way. I get what the cross is about. But it was not, his life was not merely about the cross. It was so much more. And we need to believe the promises. And for me, it's been a constant state of pressing in, praying, trying to understand. Maybe I'm trying to think it through. Maybe I'm trying to understand it too much. Maybe I'm just going to say, you know what, Lord, I'm just going to be like a kid, because that's what you told me to do anyway, right? See, I don't even believe that. I say, okay, yes, I have to be like a child. But then I was like, okay, but let's analyze this. And he's like, what part of being like a kid don't you understand? Well, that's just the problem, Lord. I need to understand what you meant by being like a kid. He's like, it means you just believe, right? When you tell your little 3-year-old, tomorrow we're going to do this, they say, oh, okay. Okay. And kids have the incredible ability to imagine. They can imagine. They can make believe. But then, we adults, we grew up. We got smart. We wised up. The world really isn't that way. But maybe it really is that way. There's phenomenal research that's coming out on the brain, for example, that we are all neuroplasticians, that we can literally change the makeup of our brain by how we think. Okay? So by our mind, how we think about things will actually determine the neurological pathways in our brain. When you continue to practice something for, let's say, 21 days, you literally make a new neurological pathway in your brain. And that's why it's hard to overcome that habit. It can become a bad habit because we have rewired our brain. That's why we're told to renew our minds. And I've been watching some very interesting series of lectures on cellular biology by Bruce Lipton. It's fascinating. It's called the the belief of or the biology of belief. If you want to check that out, you can see his videos. Now, the guy is I don't know if he's atheist, but he is an evolutionist. Okay, so I don't endorse his statements about evolution. Okay, but as far as his cellular biology goes, I think the guy is right on. He definitely has the credentials. He's a doctor, right? He's a medical researcher, and he is a professor, or at least he was, at a medical or a medical school. Okay, so he knows his stuff, right? And he's a scientist, and he has discovered that the cell, first of all, that the nucleus in the cell is not the brain. It's not the thought center. It's not the command center of the cell. What you have inside the nucleus, inside the nucleus is just a repository of blueprints. When the cell needs to build a new part, it goes to the nucleus. It gets the blueprints out and says, okay, we need to build a new protein, and then so it gets out the DNA and then the RNA, and then they make a copy of that, and then voila, they've got a new protein. Okay, and then the nucleus kind of puts everything back until it's needed again, and they close the library and they go back and do their work. The proteins are responding or acting based on the signals that they're receiving. Where are they getting these signals from? The signals are coming from the cell membrane. The cell membrane is implying, or it's transducing, some signal from the outside. Okay, so a signal from the outside, it comes down to the cell membrane. There are literally antenna, I kid you not, antenna on the cell membrane. It's looking for signals, okay? And when it gets one, it says, okay, this is a good signal. And so then it will send a signal through. That's the responder. Then there's something called the effector that will translate that into action of some sort, or into a usable message. And then the cell will act appropriately, okay? And so there are basically two kinds. There's positive, negative, good or bad. He even went so far as to say love and fear. I'm like, whoa, really? Love and fear? And what's amazing is where the signal's coming from. They're coming from the chemicals that the brain puts into the body. And where's the brain getting them? From your mind, okay? So how you perceive the world will determine what your brain secretes, and then that will go to your cells, and then your cells will react based on those chemicals, based on those signals that you're sending to your cells. And then your cells will either be in a state of abundance, in a state of growth, and where they're flourishing, or they'll be in a state of protection, where they're basically hunkering down until it feels like it's safe again. And there's no growth when they're in that protective state, when they're in a state of fear, essentially. Right? So how you see the world, how I see the world, is it basic? And do I basically have loving thoughts much of the day, or do I mostly have fearful thoughts much of the day? That's going to determine how my body is operating, right? So it's not to say that all of our medical conditions are based on those input, but a lot of it has to do with it. Okay, a lot of it does. Obviously there's things that are outside of our control. If you get hit by a car, it's not because you were having bad thoughts, maybe the other guy was having bad thoughts. I don't know. And I'll hit somebody today. Who knows? But it's a complex society. But we do have a significant role in our mind, in our brain, and in our cells. How we perceive the world. And I just keep going back to the words of Jesus, where he says, don't be afraid. According to your faith, let it be done to you. He asked the blind man, do you believe I can do this? They say, yes, Lord. And says, according to your faith, let it be done to you. Again and again and again, he talks about having faith. He talks about having faith. And we see the same story here in Exodus. It's about faith. It's about that faith. So this is just setting up the story to really get to the heart and soul of it. This is setting the stage, giving us the basic characters so that we can see what's going to happen after that. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with vigor. Verse 14, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage and mortar and brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. So they were not very nice to them. Let's just say that. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. And he said, why do you, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. Now this seems incredibly backwards and harsh and cruel, but don't nations do this today? I mean, look at China, right? China says you can only have one child, right? And if it's a girl, we probably don't want her. And I've seen some very sad videos of people saving little baby girls from sewage pipes. They get caught. Like they literally will flush the baby down the toilet. And the baby doesn't die. They can hear it. And then they have to go and open up the pipes and get that baby out. This is what happens, okay? So this is not at all fantasy or fairy tale or myth or whatever. This is real stuff. And we don't have to go as far as China to see this kind of action, do we? We can be right here in the good old US of A. It's called abortion, okay? It's called abortion. And we just do it in the womb. It's so much more convenient. You never have to see the child, okay? But, I encourage you, if you've not looked into what abortion really is, you need to do that, okay? It's not just some tissue in there. These children are fully formed. They have feelings. They experience pain. They have fear when those instruments or saline solution comes in there to kill them. They're crying out, but you can't hear them. But they're crying out in their own little way, okay? But there's no air in their lungs, so you can't hear them. But it's tragic what is still happening. God knows all of those children, and I believe the day is coming when he is going to execute justice for those children. And when we do that as a nation, as a world, eventually God says enough is enough, and he is going to bring judgment upon the world. And I believe that's one reason why the seas are going to turn to blood in the book of Revelation. Because for all the blood that was spilled upon the world, that blood is going to come back. Remember that when Cain killed his brother Abel, God said, hey, your brother's blood is crying out. Again, that's not just figurative language. There was something about that blood, it's something that, only apparently God could hear. Again, it's not just nice language. It's not hyperbolic language. This is real stuff. God can hear whatever frequency that blood is giving out. He gets it. And he's like, I can hear the blood. The blood is crying out. And all of that just goes into the earth. It's soaked up. And one day, I believe the earth is going to regurgitate that blood. And it's going to then come up into the oceans, into the rivers and the streams. And life is going to begin to perish at that point. And of course, Jesus is coming back shortly after that. So it's definitely coming. It's definitely coming. So here you have this awful command, but the midwives feared God. That's a good thing. If there's a law that says you're supposed to kill, disregard it. God likes it when you obey him more than you obey your society. But so often we're cowered into the position of fear. Say, well, I gotta do what the government tells me to do. No, you don't. Especially here in America, you guys. It's different for other countries. But in America, we are the government. Okay? We are the government. They're not there in Washington. Those are my representatives. Okay? But I'm the government. You are the government. That was the initial idea. We've kind of lost that, unfortunately. And I will admit, I have abdicated much of my responsibilities. Because I'm just too busy, okay? But, what happens is if the representatives begin to pass laws that are like, well, wait a second, I don't like that. No. That we have a moral obligation, a biblical obligation to stand up and do what is right, even if it means to disobey the government, okay? Even if it means that. And the way we know is, does it conflict with God's given laws, God's given instructions? If it does, then go with God's given instructions, okay? And of course, God had already said back in Genesis chapter 9, then in the days of Noah, that man is not to kill man, right? So, because he's created in the image of God. If he does, then his life will be required of him. So that was already clear. That was already stated. So the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. Love it. All right. And this is, of course, very true. My wife is very much involved with the helping of giving birth. She is a midwife's assistant. And so, I'm sort of in tune with some of this stuff. Not like, okay, I'm not a woman, I don't get it. So don't write me, so you have no idea. I know. But I hear the lingo, okay? So, and I did have 3 kids, and, so I sort of get it. But yeah, a lot of times a woman will just have a baby before the midwife can even get there. All right, or it's a very, very quick birth. Well, these Hebrew women, they're pretty lively, okay? The baby's coming, the midwife's, okay, I'm on the way, he goes through the grapevine, the baby's coming, okay, I'm coming. And by the time they get there, it's too late. So it's pretty cool. Now, were they telling the truth? Were they making up a story? We're not told. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they were telling the truth. And, quite possibly they were. We don't really have a good reason to think they were lying. We see that, but in any case, they're not willing to go along with Pharaoh's evil intentions here. Therefore, God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was because the midwives feared God that he provided households for them. Isn't that awesome? When you are righteous, God will preserve you. When you do the right thing. That's all righteous means, is to do the right thing. Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you. Do justly. Justly, righteous, same thing. Okay? Justly or rightly. It's the same thing. Do the right thing. Do what is righteous, what is good, what is true, what is noble. Do those things. And God will be with you. He'll protect you. Okay? So do righteously, or do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. That's it. Okay? Really, that's it. It's so simple. God took care of them. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. So notice he talks now to his people. Okay, the midwives, the Hebrew midwives aren't going to do it. So now he's commanding his people to do it. So now he's getting them in on the show here. He's getting them in on it. Chapter 2. And a man of the house of Levi went and took as a wife a daughter of Levi. So remember that now the tribe of Levi. Remember Levi and Simeon, these guys were not good guys, right? They slaughtered all the males in Shechem. They double-crossed everybody. We're told that just for fun, for sport, they hamstrung a cattle, right? They were just really mean-hearted. And we're told Jacob prophesied that Levi would have no permanent dwelling. And so we're going to see that later. But now God is going to raise up somebody from the tribe of Levi. You know, looking back, we're like, oh yeah, the Levites, they're so godly and everything. No, they weren't. You guys, there's grace on every page of this Bible. Lots of grace, okay? Grace all the way through. Grace didn't start with Jesus. It was way back in, day one. There was grace. God has always been gracious in the fact that he used anybody in the Bible, especially the Levites, who were these just mean-spirited people. That's God's grace right there. That he should raise up a man from the tribe of Levi and make him the ruler, the judge over Israel. That's a sign of grace. Should have been Judah. But God's like, well, I'm saving Judah for something else. We'll see. But now it's going to be the tribe of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. Now, this raises an interesting question. Who was the best businesswoman in the Bible? Well, of course, it was Pharaoh's daughter, because she went down to the bank and drew out a profit. Okay. Sorry, I had to say it. You know, thank you. That's all my kids. Okay. So, but it's pretty good.
Yeah,
you know, that's pretty good. But notice here that Moses' mother is not going to follow the law. Right? Remember, Pharaoh is the law. Right? Whatever he says, you do. That's it. He is the law. So she is not obeying the law because the law is in conflict with God's law. Whenever man's law is in conflict with God's law, what do you go with? God's law. You go with God's law. Now let's be honest. Most of the laws, at least here in America, most of the laws that I know about are pretty much in accordance with God's laws. Okay? I personally, and I'm no expert, I'm not a lawyer, but I have not seen too many laws that are really against. Now, maybe that's changing. We do see it in certain areas, especially when it comes to sexual orientation. That's one of the kind of the biggies. But generally speaking, most of the laws in America are pretty much in agreement with the laws of God. Okay? And that's why we have, again, generally speaking, we have a basically well-ordered society, and we're not all out there killing each other because we have laws that are based on equality, laws that are based on at least the fundamentals of the Bible. Okay, and again, that seems to be changing, but for the meantime, we're doing okay. So if a law does seriously contradict the Bible, then you have to go with the Bible. That is our moral, godly obligation. We have to do that. And there may come a price. Okay? Now, think it through, understand it, make sure you understand the law of man and understand the law of God. Okay? Make sure that they're actually in conflict with one another before you become a rebel. Okay? Because sometimes we get off on these tangents and we get off on these false crusades, and it turns out the law wasn't maybe that bad after all, or wasn't really in conflict. But if it really is in conflict, then you need to challenge it. So his mother, she's very clever. She kind of agrees to the law because she does put him in the river, but she doesn't just throw him in to drown. Right? She makes a way of escape. Brilliant. Okay, God likes this kind of stuff. Right? It's called thinking outside the box, or in this case, making a box. Okay, thinking inside the box. But whatever it is she found a way to do it. She found a way of escape. God intends for us to use our brains. He intends for us to use our ingenuity. And sometimes we pray, and nothing comes. You say, you know what? I'm going to stop praying and just start trusting. Sometimes I think we pray because we're afraid to take a step. Okay? It's good to pray. Don't get me wrong. But we can keep praying, and we got, Bible study after Bible study after Bible study. Classic case, the people praying for Peter. Peter gets out, goes, knocks on the door. Oh, Rhoda opens the door, and she shuts it. She says, Peter's here. And then, no, it can't be. It must be his ghost. I go, wait a second. The prayer has been answered. But so in times, we'd rather stay in a prayer meeting because a prayer meeting is safe. And prayer meeting doesn't really require me to get out there. It's all theoretical, sort of. But then sometimes we need to just get out and go and do it. So pray, but don't stay in the huddle too long, okay? And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" Way to go, Miriam. Okay, clever, right? Or maybe her mother put her up to this. We don't know. But in any event, this is a well-crafted plan. Now, obviously, Moses' mother had no way to know that Pharaoh's daughter would find the baby and then would be compassionate to the baby. But it would sure beat just throwing him in the river, okay? Because then his odds are like 0, okay? Here the odds are pretty good, and maybe God will do something, okay? And sure enough, I mean, do you think it was just random that it just kind of floated down there, and it was just random that she came along? Or was God like orchestrating things in the background in ways that we can't even understand? We have no idea, all right? So don't try to outthink God and say, well, okay, God, you're going to be there, right? He's like, did I not make the universe? Did I do that? So what are you talking to me for? Do I need your counsel? Yeah. No, I don't. Okay. He's like, just do your thing. I will take care of everything else. Okay. I will be with you. Do you get it? No, I will be with you. Right? They're the disciples and Jesus. They're on the boat. There's all the storm, right? They're like, Lord, we're going to perish. And he gets up. He says, be quiet. He's like, so why were you afraid again? And they're like, who can this be? We are so slow to believe it, aren't we? We're so slow. I'm not trying to beat you up on anybody. I'm talking to me. Okay? Maybe I'm talking to you too. I'm probably talking to 99% of humanity here, because we just have a way of not really believing what God is saying. But we need to repent of that and start believing, because God is faithful. God is faithful. God is faithful. Oh, he's so faithful. Step out. Have courage. Don't be afraid. And you might say, if I do this, I'm going to die. Or I feel like I'm going to die. I'm going to be destitute or whatever. That's when you say, you know what? I don't have all the answers. I don't have all my ducks in a row. I don't have the right degrees. I don't have this, and this, and this. But I'm going to walk forward anyway, because I'm going to believe that I have it. And then I will receive it. Okay? Act like you have it, and you'll receive it. It's amazing what happens when you determine this is what I'm going to do. Suddenly people are like, hey, can I help? Can I join your team? Hey, do you need something? Here's $1 million, whatever. You're like, wow, what did all that happen? It's when you start acting like you have whatever your goal is, you start acting as if, no, we're going to do this. And then the doors start to fly open. Okay? But there's that dark valley of doubt. Yeah, the valley of doubt, the dark valley of doubt before you start to ascend the mountain. You're like, ooh, it's spooky down here, but just keep walking. Just keep walking, and you'll get there. It's beautiful. So, yeah, Miriam has this good plan. This is brilliant. I mean, you couldn't ask for more, okay? Here you are. You're a slave. You have this child. He's illegal contraband. You put him in the river. Pharaoh's daughter finds him. And then you get to go and be his maid. But not only that, this is like a mother's dream. Listen, mothers. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. Woohoo, right? A mother's dream. I'm going to get paid to nurse my child. This is brilliant, okay? I mean, that is phenomenal, right? Not only did you have a baby and you're supposed to kill him, but now he's being protected. You get to be his mother again, and now you're on the clock. Now you're on Pharaoh's bank account, his payroll, to do this. Wow, is that so God or what? That is so cool. You guys don't think that it only happened back then. Because as we get into these stories, we say, "Oh, this is so cool. God really worked back then." He still works. He still does this kind of stuff in your life, in my life. He still does it. He still does these things. We don't have the advantage of hindsight, right? This is all hindsight here. None of the people involved had any clue what was happening as they were obedient. And they stepped out and, the mother putting Moses in, "Buy my child, I'll never see you again," and suddenly she gets her child back with wages. Oh my goodness. Okay. Right? Every person had to go through the crucible of faith. Every one of them. And we're no different. It's the same human condition. It's the same God. It's the same general test, because God wants us to grow. He's got great things in store. But if we remain in fear and immobilized and say, "I will not believe," then you won't enter into the blessing. Bottom line. Okay? If you doubt, don't think that you'll get anything from the Lord's hand. Okay? Not that he doesn't love you or he hates you or something like that. None of it. It's just God's like, "I want to work in your life," but it's a collaboration. Collaboration. How do I know it's a collaboration? How do I know that God needs me to agree with him? Because when Jesus went to Nazareth, it says that he couldn't do many miracles there because of their unbelief. You're like, but he's God. I mean, he created everything out of nothing. He didn't have to have the nothing agree with him. "Nothing, do you agree to work with me so that I can make you into something?" There was no conversation. He just said it and it happened. Right? He doesn't have to do that with the animals, but we're different. You know why? Because we have a little bit of him in us. You know what? You guys ever had sourdough? Sourdough. In fact, you can go to, I'm trying to think of the name. Anybody know the sourdough around here, sourdough company? There's one, it starts with a B, whatever. But the sourdough that they give you, they're like, the starter for this sourdough is over 100 years old. You're like, whoa. Okay. Sourdough is very interesting because once you get this dough made up and it's sour, okay, you keep a little bit behind, you hold it back, and then you take the rest and you make it. But then with that starter, this little lump of dough, you then put that into the next batch, and you put in your flour and your water and stuff. But that sourness of this dough will then spread to the rest of the dough that you're making, right? So that you always have that starter. And they've had they've been taking that little lump out now for over 100 years. And it's a boulangerie or something like that. It's from San Francisco. It was very popular with the miners. But it's kind of like, God had some starter, right? There's a little bit of starter in us, right? He took some starter and put it in Adam, and then a little pinch of that has been pinched off every time so that we have that. That's why Peter says that you are partakers of the divine nature. What do you think it means when God says that you are in my image and you're in my likeness? That's what it means, is that we have a little bit of him in us, right? So if God is all that, if he is this amazing being and he's put a little bit of us in him, then he's like, he needs us to agree with him when he wants to do something. That's why he can't just bust in and say, "I'm going to do this," and you're going to take it. Okay?
Can two walk together
unless they be agreed? Now look, it's not to say that God's plans are thwarted. Don't get me wrong. God will do what God is going to do with or without you. Okay? But he'd like to do it with you. And if he has to do it without you, then he'll do it without you. Okay? But if you want to be part of it, okay, he isn't just going to show up at your door and say, "Okay, you're coming with me, doggone it." He doesn't do that. That's what Satan does. Satan says, "You're going to do it my way, and I don't care what you say. I'm going to overpower you. I'll possess you if I have to get my way. I will make you serve me." God's like, no, I'm here to serve you, and we're going to do this thing together. But it has to be mutual agreement. That's the amazing thing about God. So what does that mean in our situation? We have power, you guys. Again, we're not more powerful than God. Don't get me wrong. Don't write to me and say, what are you talking about, Doug? But just think it through, you guys. Think it through. That we are co-laborers with God. Right? We've got part of his essence in us. And that it just gives us tremendous authority and power. And that's what Jesus kept trying to like, come on, you guys, like, you can do this. They're like, no. He's like, yes, you can do it, really. No. Yeah. Eventually, they got it. Eventually, it took them a while. But the rest, since the days of the disciples, the church, by and large, has been feasting on the leaven of the Pharisees. We're eating the leaven of the Pharisees because we will not believe the miracles that we are authorized to do. We're like, no, we have our theology, it's systematic, it's really good. We've got everything figured out and dialed in, and we've got our definitions, and we've got our Strong's concordances and all this stuff. And God's like, yeah, you know a lot of things about me, okay? And say the difference between being a fan of somebody and being married to somebody, right? You can be a fan of somebody, know all their stats, know all their home runs or whatever, free throws or whatever this may be, or whoever your idol is, okay? You know their stuff, right? Maybe you're into movies, I know all the movies this guy's ever done, and I can tell you all this different stuff. That's what we're like. But as far as the relationship, zero, okay? Pretty much. Why? Because we don't believe what he tells us to do. So I just love it how God works this out. So don't think that this story is just, that was nice back then, it has a nice little, meaning. God works today. Verse 10, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. Now in Hebrew, that's Moshe. In Egyptian, it's Masha, which literally means to draw forth. There's been some confusion about this because there is a name, for example, Tutmosis, okay, which means the son of Tut, or son of Thut, okay. Egyptologists have thought that Moses and Moses is the same word, but they're different. And they said, this just proves that that this is all folk etymology, but it's not folk etymology. If you understand the Egyptian, again, I'm no expert in this, but my friend Brad Sparks looked it up, and sure enough, there it is. It's right in the Egyptian dictionary. So you can check it out yourself if you want to. But she's speaking Egyptian here, and she names him Moshe because she draws him out of the water. Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, and he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. Now, what's happening here? More than likely, if my friend Brad Sparks is correct, which I believe that he is, so if we have the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom, rather than being like this chronologically, that they're more like this, so that the Old Kingdom is in Upper Egypt and the Middle Kingdom is in Lower Egypt, that they both exist at the same time, but it's a divided kingdom. What possibly could have happened is that Pharaoh's daughter from Upper Egypt, that is, or from Lower Egypt, so that's northern Egypt, the land of Goshen, right? So Alexandria area. So let's say that Pharaoh, that from that area, has a daughter. Here she is, we just met her, and she sees this baby, okay? And she makes him her own, okay? But who is she married to? That's the big question, okay? Well, if Brad's theory is correct, then she's married to someone in Upper Egypt. that is in southern Egypt. And according to his research, it may have been someone by the name of Pepi II. Really, his name was Pepi. Okay, and I was just looking this up today just to confirm it. If that is in fact that's the last king of the old kingdom, and again, these are concurrent. He was a homosexual, so it's possible. Again, we're speculating a bit, okay, but it's possible that if she were married to him, if he's homosexual, maybe she didn't think I might not have a son of my own, so I might as well adopt this one. Okay, that's possible. Now, if that's the case, guess where she lived? She didn't live near the land of Goshen. She lived in southern Egypt. See? So then she would have taken Moses with her, obviously after he's weaned and all this different stuff, but she would then take him with her back down to southern Egypt, and he would grow up there. And it would make sense because Josephus tells us that Moses was a general in the Egyptian army and that he fought against the Ethiopians. Okay, so that would seem to confirm that little piece there. Now, again, we don't know that absolutely, but it's a very plausible scenario. So now we're basically some 40 years later, and Moses comes back for a visit, okay? Because he knows, hey, mom and dad, well, I think she was my mom, she lives up there. The Hebrews that raised me when I was just a little kid, they're up there. I'm somehow one of them. Maybe he doesn't know the full picture, but he knows enough, okay? He knows, yeah, these are kind of like my people, And for some reason I was adopted or whatever, we don't know what he's told exactly, but he gets it basically. So now he comes back for a visit, okay? And this would make sense when Pharaoh is so irate he's willing to kill him. So he goes out. Now, it came to pass in those days that when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. Right? So think about it. If Moses is the prince of Egypt and everybody knows it's Prince Moses, then why would this Egyptian suddenly, why wouldn't he just bow down and say, oh my goodness, your highness, sorry. Okay? Something isn't quite right there. But if Moses lives in southern Egypt, and now he's come back home on a trip to say hello, they don't really know him. He's not really a somebody. He's kind of, he looks important, but we don't recognize him. Okay, and so that would again seem to fit that theory that Brad has come up with. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out on the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting, and he said to the one who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? So again, he's looking at this very much as an outsider, like, wait a second, you guys are supposed to be all one, you're supposed to be happy, right? And isn't this true of Christianity? The world looks in and says, wait a second, why are you guys hitting each other? You're supposed to be like one happy family. We don't see any unity here. And we're like, well, we have it, just not with this guy, because what he's teaching is so wrong, okay? It brings up a really important point, because there will always be somebody who's teaching something wrong. First, start by looking in the mirror, okay, and you'll find the person right there. But we're so concerned about the plank in our brother's eye, right? She's like, wait a second, there's a plank in your eye. Your brother's got the speck, but you got the plank in your eye. And oh my goodness, do we ever suffer from this as Christians? It's so awful, but we can't see it. We literally can't see it because there's a plank in our eye. But boy, I can see that speck in my brother's eye so well. What kind of specks? Well, what he's teaching is false doctrine. Okay, maybe it is. Okay, he's got a speck in his eye. It's false doctrine. What about your doctrine? I mean, you might get this right. You get an A+ for this. But what about all this over here? Well, we don't talk about that, You see, we're so quick to judge. And you guys, I'm raising my hand because I've been guilty. I probably still am. But I'm really praying. I'm just seeking ways to repent of where I've been so that I don't continue in those practices and those mindsets. I want to grow. I want to be like Christ. And so I've had to, eat humble pie, swallow my pride, etc., and say, oh my goodness, what I was teaching, what I was believing, what I was criticizing others for, I myself was doing. And I see it. Of course you can see this in really any field, but I'm picking on Christians because I am one. I'm picking on Christians because we are supposed to be known by our love for each other, first and foremost. And yet, generally, the world's like, I'm not that impressed. I'm not that impressed. And I've seen it, again, being sort of in the spotlight a little bit, on my YouTube channel, on my website, Facebook. I just see the way people interact with each other. And I have to be honest, there are times when I really want to write something nasty in return, like, and I'm like, no, bite your tongue. Take your fingers away from the keyboard. Do not touch the keyboard. Okay, I want to write, you're an idiot, I just like, you're so stupid, what do you know, okay? They're like, well, where did you study? Do you know any languages? I want to sometimes just, but I'm like, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Okay, and sometimes I just have to get up and walk away because I want to dish it out just as I'm getting it. All right, and I've been guilty. But I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. All right, and I just hope, and you know what, I get some emails occasionally, and I thank you people for writing those, saying, Doug, I just noticed that you're meek, or that you are compassionate. I'm like, wow, thank you. Thank you. I can only say that humbly. Thank you. Okay, I'm honored that people would say that. And again, even talking about it sounds like I'm bragging, but I'm not trying to brag. I'm just trying to say that we need to change our attitude. We need to change how we treat one another. Nobody has perfect theology. Nobody. You included. Me included. So let's simmer down. Let's put the stones down, okay? And not stone the first person we see that has theology different than our own. Okay? And you know what? Maybe we should listen to people a bit more. In fact, maybe when the Jehovah's Witnesses come by your door, instead of getting your stones out and saying, take that, you, get out of here. Maybe just, instead of doing that, just, tell me what you believe. Well, tell me, what is it that I need to do? And sometimes you listen to them, you're like, really? So, okay, I disagree with you about Jesus and a few other things, I'm not saying you're right, but when you kind of I'm not talking about Charles Taze Russell. I'm not talking about the Watchtower Society. I'm talking about the person. The person. That's what I'm talking about. Same thing with the Mormons. Look, I know that Joseph Smith was wrong, and the Mormon Church, they got some wacky doctrines, but talk to the person, you guys. That's all we can do, right? I can't take on the whole establishment. Who am I? Okay, talk to the person. Say, let's just talk, you and me. Let's put away our theological compendia and just you and I talk. And look, I want to understand you. You can understand me. We can get into the Word and talk about it. It's fun, but let's be humans. Let's be civil. Let's be kind. Let's show love, and maybe we'll learn something. Maybe I'll learn something about me. Maybe that person will learn something about himself, and maybe the Spirit will convict where necessary. Maybe the Spirit will show the Jehovah's Witness, look, you guys got a little bit wrong there on John 1:1. Okay, got that? Oh, okay. Maybe that's the Spirit's job, and not my job. Could it be? And if I will actually show love and compassion, then it might go a lot further. It might. We could try it, see what happens, right? What do you have to lose? I've been practicing that lately, and wow, the results are phenomenal. Instead of like trying to get into this wrestling match with the people, just listen, accept them as a person, and it's a completely different experience. It's amazing. Instead of sparring, I'm trying to love. And oh my, it's really nice. I like it. So, Moses is surprised, but he probably shouldn't be because people fight. But let's not fight, you guys. Let's not fight. Verse 14, then he said, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Again, their very words suggest that they have no idea who Moses is. Because if Moses were the prince of this area, then they wouldn't be saying this, would they? They'd be saying, oh yeah, you're Moses. You are the prince. You are the judge. But they don't know this guy. They don't know him. That suggests that Moses grew up somewhere else. I mean, he wasn't just like, in a cloister somewhere and, that he never came outdoors. That's not the case at all. But he just wasn't around. So, do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? So Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. Again, that suggests that Pharaoh doesn't really know Moses. They're not like buddies. They're not father-son kind of thing, grandfather and grandson. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. There we go back to the well. It's just always back to the watering hole, isn't it? That's where things happen. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. Way to go, Moses. Just like Jacob, right? There's something about helping the ladies at who have to water the sheep. Who knows why it's that way, but anyway, that was their job. When they came to Reuel, their father, he said, how is it that you have come home? You come so soon today? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock. So he said to his daughters, and where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. Now let's go back for a second. Who is this Midian, this priest of Midian? So the priest of Midian, he's a priest of who? Of the Most High God. Isn't that awesome? Completely detached from the nation of Israel. Okay, he's not part of the covenant. There isn't any covenant. Well, there's the Abrahamic covenant, but there isn't a nation per se yet. Okay, there isn't the Mount Sinai and all that stuff. None of that exists yet. So how can he be a priest to the Most High God? Well, that's because God has always had a faithful remnant. There are always people out there. It's not that he has them. There's always been people that are seeking God, and when people seek God, God responds.
Is that what Midian means?
No, Midian is just an area in southern Jordan or in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so that's just an area. And so Moses goes a long way away to get away from Egypt. He goes all the way as far as Midian. But this person, Reuel means God sees. God sees. And he is worshiping the Most High God. Just as as we saw with Melchizedek, that he was a priest of El Shaddai. You see, God has always had people. There are always people that are seeking God. So sometimes we think, no, you have to, if you don't go down to the altar and say the sinner's prayer, you're not in. But that's not what we see in Scripture. What we see is that, if somebody is seeking God, God will work with that person. Okay. So the question of what about the people in the darkest parts of Africa? Well, I don't know. God can work with them in ways that I don't understand. Okay. All I know, the testimony that I have is about Jesus. That's the testimony that I have. Okay. What God does with people in the darkest jungles of Africa and South America, I don't know. I'll let God worry about them. But my testimony is Jesus. That's what I know. Okay? So let's not get derailed on such things. And so he comes, he lives with them, he gets a wife. Pretty good deal, you know. Basically, guys, you're looking for a wife, go down to your local well, feed the flocks, water the flocks, and you might get a wife out of it. Okay? But I have to warn you, these kind of marriages don't seem to work out that well. All right, Jacob had issues, right? He watered the flock, and guess what? He didn't get the wife he wanted it right away eventually, but it caused a lot of strife. Same thing with Moses. He's got this wife, Zipporah, but we'll see in a couple chapters that she calls him a bridegroom of blood, okay? And then she says, and then later, basically, it seems that they almost get divorced, because basically Moses sends her home to her father later on. What would you call that? I'd call that a divorce. I mean, if you send your wife back to her father's house, that's a divorce. Okay, so it sounds like they actually got divorced. But nevertheless, chances are you won't go looking for a woman at a well, so we don't have to worry about it. All right, and she bore him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. Now, the word ger means stranger. But what I find interesting, the word Gershom actually means, garash means to send away or to divorce. Okay? You've been sent away. When God sent the Adam and Eve out of the garden, he garash, okay? He sent them away. It's the same root that's being used here. So I would suggest that it's more than just being a foreigner, but there's something of, it's this idea of separation or sent away, divorced, if you will. And that's literally what Moses was. He was divorced from both Egypt and from Israel. So this name had a lot of emotion packed in it, okay? I mean, everything that he's known, I mean, the Bible just, he went away. It's like, well, wait a second. This is a pretty radical thing. You grew up as a prince. You had the very best of everything. And now you've been sent away, fleeing for your life. And you have pretty much nothing. Okay, you've got a nice place it's got a place to sleep, let's put it that way. But there's nothing special about it. Not like what you used to know. Those days are over. And so he names his son and such. Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So that Pharaoh that wanted to kill Moses is gone, and they cry out. This is so typical when a leader passes on, and there's kind of an uproar, and the children of Israel are just crying out. God hears them. Now, guys, don't think that God didn't hear, okay, or that God remembered. He's like, what was I supposed to do? He goes back, he checks his day timer. Oh my goodness, I got that covenant with Abraham. I forgot about that thing. It's not that way at all. God never forgets. Okay, but when it says that God remembers, it's now he's decided to do something about it. To remember something is, okay, now that covenant that I have, I'm going to take action upon that. I'm going to take action. It's time to do something about it. This has all been prophesied. Remember back in Genesis 15, God said to Abraham, know this, that your descendants will be slaves for 400 years, but in the fourth generation, I will take them out. So basically, the timer is going tick, 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 ting. And God's like, oh, okay, time's up. It's now time to do it. And he's like, okay. Basically, God's doing his thing. The timer goes ding. And God's like, okay, it's time to do it now. And so now he's like, now I'm going to turn my attention back, and we're going to do something amazing. So this covenant's never gone away, but now he's going to make good on it, and he's going to do something amazing. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. There's that same word for yada. Yada. So remember, we started off in chapter 1 where it says that the Pharaoh did not know Joseph. That's the same word. But here we have God acknowledged. God knew them. It's not that he didn't, like, who are you guys again? Oh, yeah. He acknowledged them. He recognized who they were. He said, oh, yeah, I know. I acknowledge what's happening in your life right now. I acknowledge that. So it's never that he's impervious or just he doesn't have any clue. It's just sometimes the timer's going tick, 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 tick. And you're like, God, do you like remember? He's like, I do, but the timer's still going. And you're like, can you speed it up? Like, turn the dial or hit clear or whatever. He's like, no. And it seems unfair, but remember, God's timing is perfect in ways that we cannot even imagine. That's the trouble. We just can't even imagine how perfect his timing is. But it really is perfect. And so we have to just wait for it to go ting, because when it does, then God will act in ways you cannot even imagine. And certainly that's what he does here. Pretty awesome stuff. Pretty awesome stuff. Well, I really was thinking we get to chapter 3, but we didn't get there. So we'll have to leave that for next time. But just want to encourage you. God loves you. He cares about you. Maybe in your life right now, all you hear is the tick, 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 and you're waiting for that timer to buzz, and it seems like it's just taken forever. It will. It will. God has not forgotten. He remembers the promise. In the meantime, be faithful, be strong, have courage, keep walking. Don't give up. He will be with you. There is no reason to fear. God is with us. We thank him so much for that.
That's Bowden sourdough bread, by the way.
It's, was
Bowden.
it? Bowden. Thank you. Bowden. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's boulangerie, but it's Bowden. Thank you. Let's just pray. Yevarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'eh Adonai panav sorry, I'll start over. Yevarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'eh Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. By the way, this is the symbol for Shin, which is shalom. Okay, shalom. Okay, or you can also do it this way. Nanu nanu, or Star Trek, live long and prosper. It's the Shin. Okay, so that's what that's actually from. But yeah, okay. All right, you guys, you can always go to my website. You can check out the previous broadcast at douglashamp.com. If you want to give to this ministry, you can go to douglashamp.com. There's a button right there. If you want to get in touch with me, go to douglashamp.com, and there is a place where you can write to me. May the Lord bless you. The Lord will bless you and keep you. The Lord will. Until next time. God bless.